Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Roberto Friato, MVP, and Fabio Franzini, MVP Italy, who will be talking to you today about Azure Management, Libraries for Advanced Code-Based Automation. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC19. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is packed with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com and click the content link at the top. Have you or your team been working on a product, solution, or project that you are proud of? Whether it's a simple and effective solution or a larger, more complex transformation, we invite you to enter this year's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community Awards. Visit SharePointEurope.com for more details. The closing date for submissions is September 25th, 2019. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Roberto and Fabio in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be added to the Resource Center where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now let's begin today's presentation. Hello, Roberto, and hello, Fabio.
Hello.
How are you today?
Fine, thanks. And you?
Great. So Fabio, I'm going to pass over to you first. So
No,
take
it's
it
me
away.
first.
Oh, it's Roberto first.
Okay, Roberto, I'll pass over to you.
Okay.
So Roberto, you should see a dialogue asking you to take control.
Perfect. Do you see my screen?
I can indeed. Take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you very much to be here. We are here to discuss about the management capabilities of Azure through C# code instead of other approaches that are more traditional. I'm Roberto Friato. I'm a consultant. I'm actually a CTO for two company, part-time CTO for two company, and a consultant in Azure technologies and architecting applications, mainly in C# and Microsoft stack. And please, Fabio.
Yes, I'm Fabio Franzini from Italy, and I am an independent consultant and trainer, and my focus is on the Office 365 services and specifically to create and customize this kind of services.
Okay, perfect. So a little brief introduction just to justify our approach. So mainly, typically, when we deal around infrastructure as a code, we are talking about some technologies that help us to define architecture and define deployment, define a topology of a distributed system by using code. For example, in Azure, there's the ARM, there's like a JSON syntax to define components and so on. But you can also create something with the scripting. So PowerShell is an option, or Ansible, or other approaches that are mainly related to files, to scripting, to text files that defines a certain infrastructure. Okay, so our approach is, why don't do directly in C# with a strong typed object, with compiled code, with something that us as developers can implement and maintain, and probably also a version and build and run in the same pipelines and instruments that we are already accustomed to. So this is the assumption of the session. So what we are creating right now, we are just creating this part. Do you see my mouse moving?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We are creating this part, so in this part, so let's split the scenario. I'm the developer and Fabio is the business guy that recept the inputs from the business. So for example, the business says, okay, I got a new client, and please developers, please IT, you should create the entire infrastructure for this client. So in most of the recent software as a service companies, probably the single deployment can also serve multiple clients without any kind of further deployments. But in this demo, in this scenario, we want to replicate the same environment for each client arrived to the platform. So on the SharePoint side, Fabio will show you that by inserting a new client in a site, in a list, I leave Fabio to explain better later. It triggers a message in a queue, and the process I'll writing right in a few minutes will listen to that queue and start some operation. For example, takes template image for the web application and the database from a storage account, and then create a database from that template and in a elastic pool that I'm explaining better later. And the same principle is applied to the web part that is not a SharePoint web part. The web part in terms of the web area that is deployed on Azure App Service, starting from a template too that is on the storage. After that, we create a custom domain with an ID, a specific ID for that specific customer. And then when the process is finished, I will notify back another technology that's called Event Grid to notify back the SharePoint side and perform some final operation. For example, reconcile the input of Fabio with the final URL of the deployment for that specific tenant, for that specific client. Okay, so here there are many technology. We'll dig them in this demo, so we'll discuss them one by one. Just an introduction to the two that we are not discussing so much, that are Service Bus and Event Grid. They worth a huge amount of time just by themselves. So they are just used in this demo to act as a broker, as message broker. In this case, Service Bus is more a message broker, so it's a message broker like first in, first out queues or publish and subscribe topics. At the other side, Event Grid is more like a notification system built by Azure and built to react to the same Azure event inside the platform. So we use them both just to show to you, but we can also achieve the same result just by using a single queue, of course, and a single type of queue. Okay, so it just to mention more services and to let you learn how they can be combined to create a more complex service. Okay, so now we can switch to Fabio that will show you the SharePoint part.
Yeah. Okay, you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is a very simple SharePoint online site. The name is SPC Webinar, and I create a tenant list. So this is a simple list, SharePoint list, with 3 columns. The ID column contain the ID for each item that this list contains, the title, the default title column, and another column, the name is URL, because the purpose of this list is to permit to the users to insert one item for each request that the company, for example, wants to create a new tenant for the client. And then behind this list, we have 2 simple flow. The first flow is the new tenant request. This is the name, and this is a very powerful flow, because if I switch to the edit mode, I'm able to show you the implementation. This flow have a trigger, and the trigger is when a new item is created inside this implementation of the site, SPC Webinar, and for the specific list name tenants. When a new item is created inside this list, I use another activity. The name is send message to the queue by using a connection string ASP webinar that Roberto sent me. So this is the connection string to the service bus queue. And inside this activity, I use the acquisition topic because I want to send a message inside a specific topic and a simple content. This content is a JSON content with two simple information. First is the request ID with the ID that comes from the item that is just created when this flow is started. And the second information is the tenant name. The tenant name is for me the title column inside the SharePoint list. And when I create a new item, for example, Roberto, I'm able to, can I create a new item?
Sure.
Okay. I use the simple, yes, I use the simple interface from the SharePoint list, and then I enter a simple title like client 1, for example, and I don't valorize the URL column because this column will be valorized from another flow that will be triggered later. And then click Save. At this moment, I create a simple item, and then if I go to the details of this flow, I'm able to see that 11 seconds ago, the flow is started. And then the process it's started because I put this information like a JSON file, like a JSON message inside the service bus queue. So now the process is starting, and then I want to show you only the second flow, and the second flow is the tenant URL update flow. In this case, I create a flow to use an HTTP request when a HTTP request is received. This is a very powerful trigger because in this way we are able to call this flow by using a simple REST operation like post by this URL. This is a URL that automatically generated by flow, and then this trigger, it's very powerful because I'm able to specify a JSON schema to validate the input, the input message. In this case, this JSON schema comes from the event grid format for the message, and I modify only the data part because I want to expect to receive a URL property of the type string. And then when the code, the Roberto's code it's completed, the process is completed, Roberto sent me a message by an HTTP call at this URL, and then I validate by this schema the message. Then, because the schema it's an array, it's not an object, it's an array, I use an apply to each activity. And in this case, I want to apply to each for each items inside the body of the HTTP request. And then inside this apply to each, I create, I insert two activities. The first activity is to get item, because I need to get the item from SharePoint by filtering by a ID property, because Roberto valorized the ID property of the message with the ID of the request that I previous sent to the queue. And then with this get item, I retrieve the item from the SharePoint list, and then I use update item to make a simple update to the tenants list inside the ESPC webinar website, SharePoint site, by filtering by the same ID, and then set the title with the same title that comes from the get item, and I set the URL by using the URL property from the object inside the body. So this is very simple implementation of the two flows, but it's very powerful because in this case we can use flow like an integration system, because the system are very separated by the service bus and the event grid, and I don't know what is the process that Roberto have implemented, but I'm concentrate only on create a SharePoint list and two simple flow to send a message and receive the message. Obviously, I have to communicate, in this case, this URL to Roberto, because Roberto have to call this URL to send me a message. Correct, Roberto?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. It's your time, Roberto. I think that you have to
Thank you,
show
Fabio.
your code.
Okay. You see me again?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So just to connect the dots, Fabio sent to the Azure Service Bus and a specific topic that's named is acquisition, a message. So if I refresh this, okay, I will see a new message arrived to this subscription. Okay, if you're not aware to the concept of subscription topics and queues, just a very brief introduction. A queue is just a first in, first out queue. So message arrives and message goes out from multiple receiver, multiple senders. In the case of topics, we have a single point to receive, that is this one, and this single point propagates the message to each subscription that is created below. So in that case, we have just 3 subscriptions. These ones are just for backup purposes, just for fail-safe. This one is used for the demo. Okay, so in this one, there's the message that Fabio sent to me. So now it's time to implement the code that reads from that queue, from that subscription, and implements all the blocks that we've talked about. Just as a brief introduction to the existing architecture in the cloud, because to do this, I have a pre-existing architecture that is the one that runs even now the other tenants, the other clients. So we have these 3 apps. Each one has its own DNS name, its own ID, its own database that pointing to different data. Okay, those data are on a SQL server on Azure. So these are 4 database, independent database, but in the same Azure Elastic Pool. An Elastic Pool is just a virtual concept, just like a virtual container that contains multiple databases just for billing and performance reason. So for instance, if you have a standalone database, you pay for that database even if you are not using it. Okay, of course there are different tiers for that. When you have an Elastic Pool, you have just one entity that are you paying for, and in this entity you can put multiple databases to pool them. okay? Because in case of different usage patterns, in case of spike in one but normal usage in the other ones, you can save much money by using elastic pools. And in this case, we are deploying new database in this elastic pool. So an elastic pool is a thing that you don't see here in SQL Server, because it's just a logical thing that acts on Azure just to let you save money and pool resources. Okay. So, if you have a question, you can write when you want in the window, just and we can answer in real time or even at the end of the session. Okay, so now we are going to create a new implementation of this, a new deployment of this implementation on another URL that is pointing to a brand new database. So let's do it. We created in .NET standard C# code, so we call it ASPC webinar. We need some NuGet libraries to integrate the various components. The first one is, of course, the one that can listen to the service bus. So let's search service bus. Let's search Microsoft Azure Service Bus. That is better. Okay. For listening for new messages. Then at the end of the process, I will notify event grid. So let's include also event grid. And in the middle of the process, I need intensively the libraries to manage Azure. So to use the REST API to create resources, list resources, and so on. Those are the same APIs that the Azure portal is using right now to create things and doing stuff. But there are some client libraries and SDK that can be used to do this from C#. This is the Microsoft Azure Management Fluent one that integrates all the services of Azure that are actually supported by this library and this pattern. Okay, after that, I can start to implement the process. I decided to live code just the part that is using the management library. So the part using the service bus, I'm not live coding it because it's just long and useless in this context. So I just passed it. So we need a service bus connection. That is just like a connection string with a token, a topic name that is the name of the topic, so the single point of entry of the messages, so the point where Fabio sent me the message, and a subscription name that is the ones that I'm reading from, okay, and a client. Then I need a main method that just instantiate the subscription client and register the handlers. The handlers are just the points to manage even exception or to manage the actual receiving of a message. And finally, I have the actual method that process a single message. In this case, I take the content of a message in UTF and I deserialize it in a root object, and then I pass to another class that I'm writing right now to do the actual processing. Okay, I'm just missing some usings, and I need this root object model that is the simple model that Fabio showed you just a few minutes ago. So a JSON representation with just two properties, but in case I create a strong typed one here. Okay, so the root object is made by request ID and tenant name, and this is the callback, the back model. Okay, the one that I send back to Fabio with the URL that represents my result. Okay, so now we can just make some quick fixes. We can cancel this. We can change this and let the async main run. Okay, set the start project. So everything is quite completed. Okay, I just need to write my class right now. Okay. So first, I need to authenticate to Azure, and the method I use to authenticate should guarantee to me that I have access, I have permission to access the resources, so to create new things, to read the existing ones. Okay, so how to do that? Let's go through Azure just to take a look. We can create a user in Active Directory, or just better, a service identity. When we have automated process, it's better to use a service identity instead of a user, a real user that acts with impersonation, like in web pages and so on. In that case, this tool can be an autonomous tool that runs continuously or runs in some specific automated context. So it's better to create here an application that has some parameters and a secret, and that I have already created and configured them. And after that, we can go to the subscription or to the single services or to the specific resource group and say, hey, give the contributor permission to that service identity. So this service identity can do everything except create new users and assign permission to the subscription. Okay, so this is a pre-requirement to have an external identity that can create and manage stuff inside Azure, inside an Azure subscription. So we have that, but we need a huge amount of settings. So names of resource group, names of existing SQL Server, password, users, the various tenant ID or directory ID. So we need a huge amount of settings to perform automation at this site. So as you probably already saw in PowerShell, in automation, in Ansible, in IRM, there are the concept of variables. In this case, we need to invent this. So we can use app settings, we can take it from the database, we can do everything we want. In this case, for this demo, I hard-coded them inside a C# code just to be faster. So these are all the settings we need to proceed in our demo. So let's create the credentials. SDK context, Azure Credential Factory from Service Principal. Let's take the client ID from the settings model, then the client secret, then the tenant ID, and let's specify the Azure environment, that is the global cloud. I don't know if this is a well-known concept, but the Azure global cloud is the one, and specifically in some countries Azure has been deployed for government. So when we use the Azure, the official Azure, we are just using always the Azure global cloud. After that, we can create the Azure entry point that will be the object containing our artifacts. We say, hey, authenticate using that credentials, and use the subscription, the specific subscription passed here. Okay, now in the Azure object, we can have everything: SQL servers, web apps, DNS, storage, and so on. So first step I want to do is create a new database. Oh, where are the templates of our database and web application? In a storage account. So here in that storage account, in a blob storage, we have this container images with the DB image and web app. This container is private, so even if we have a URL for this, we can access to this because the container, of course, is private. So we need to specify now, in addition to this URL, also the secret, the connection string, the application key to connect to the storage account. So let's create the new DB, but first let's get the reference to the server when I want to create the database into. So the server is, give me the servers by resource group and by its name, the SQL server, that is CMakers. Then, okay. Then give me the pool, because I want to deploy a new database in existing pool, not just in the server, but in the server and in an existing SQL Elastic pool. So Azure SQL Server Elastic pools, get by SQL Server and by its name. The pool is called CMakers Basic, and here in Azure is this artifact. It's just a virtual container that contains multiple databases. This one, these ones right now. No, where are them? Okay, here somewhere. I don't. Okay, here they are. Okay. Okay, now I define the new database, telling Azure SQL Server databases. Now, as you saw, the approach to get something is get by resource group, get by SQL Server. Instead, to create something, the pattern is define. Okay, so now we are defining a new database. Which name can we put in it? Okay, let's define an ID just unique to this session, for example, coming from the date, and let's define something in this pattern. So tenant minus ID. Now we specify an existing server and an existing Elastic pool, and stop. I would say, okay, create. After this line that is run synchronously, we have just the new database, but new and empty, not with the templates. So we need now to restore the template inside of this database. So new database, so import backpack. Where is the backpack? Into the DB image URL, this one. But we need a storage access key. And we need credentials for the SQL Server to connect to and start the restoration job. So SQL user, SQL password, and now, okay, execute. After this line, we have the database with the tables of the template. There are just two, blog and post, okay. And we can pass to the web application part. So the same things happen to the web application part. I would like to put a new web application into an existing web farm that is called in Azure App Service Plan. So the first thing is to get the plan, Azure App Service Plan, get a resource group. In this case, it's a different resource group, but just a configuration. And the name of the plan is here. Now we can create the web app, telling Azure, go to web apps, define a new web app. In that case, I will call it CM web t-id, just to be consistent to the other ones. I would specify an existing plan, where to put it, an existing resource group. Then I can define a huge set of settings. Okay, so let's start with disable the client affinity. So the sticky sessions. Sticky sessions are very powerful, but in case we are writing applications from scratch that are stateless, that use correctly the state, do not use too much memory and local disk, we can disable affinity. That is a good thing. Then we can empty the default documents. In app service, we have a huge list of default documents. We can remove them all. Numerable dot empty string to list. It's quite tricky, but just to be compliant to the syntax. Then we can, for instance, specify that we don't need PHP, that we have the binaries of the web application compiled in x64, so we need to specify it explicitly. And then I think stop. Yeah, web app always on. That is a settings to say to stay online always, and in case of recycle of the application pull to restart to avoid the cold, the warm up of the application. And then we have almost finished. The last thing is the most important one. So when you restore a web application that is just a template from the storage, I have a zip, an archive with the binaries and a sample configuration. So the sample configuration contains a connection string pointing to a placeholder, for example. So now we need to make some tricks, not real tricks, but a good process to make this application pointing to the right database. So this application that is here, this code will be available in GitHub in the next hour, is here in this archive. There are two settings. One with the name of the tenant or the ID, this ID, just to show it here in the title and in the home page. And the other settings is the database, the connection string, just to point to the specific database. So here Azure comes in to help us with a very elegant solution. Each web application hosted on app service has a configuration section, a configuration blade, where we can put these settings, and in case there are settings here, they are taken in precedence over the ones eventually present in the app settings and in the web config or in the environment. So this is the way to override the settings that the application will see at runtime. So this is the pattern, the practice that we are approaching, specifying with app settings. Let's create a new dictionary, string. The first one is the tenant ID. So tenant key is just tenant ID, and the ID is just the ID I created. And the second one is the DB connection key, that is database connection, and the value is is DB connection value. But in that case, DB connection value is just a template itself. So I need to replace the new database, the user, the password. So I format the string with ID, SQL user, and SQL password. Okay, so we now have the settings configured, and we create the web application. After web application is created, it's just empty. So it's empty, configured with the right settings, but empty with no code. So we need to deploy the code. But first we want to map the custom domain. So now that we have the web app running, we can obtain the host name from the web app. That will be in the format something.azurewebsites.net. Okay. Now I can get the DNS from Azure, the DNS zone of our custom domain. The custom domain is demo.cloudmakers.xyz. Now I define another approach that is update. So when you have a resource that you want to change settings and add something inside that resource, the correct practice is to use the update. Okay, so we saw define, get, and now update. Update, let us define a new CNAME. For example, the CNAME is just the ID of the application with alias, so the host pointing to is the name, the host, the public URL of the web application that we created. And now, we can also specify the time to live. Time to live is very important, and I suggest when you deal with the software as a service with many customers, with many users, with the huge traffic, I suggest to keep the TTL low in case you want to switch between deployments, in case you want to make some sort of disaster recovery and to reduce the downtime. The TTL is a really interesting and important settings for your DNS configuration. It's not something that is historically tied to the developers, but now that this the development in the cloud is very related to some concept of the IT infrastructure, it's better that we as developers will learn something that is out of our natural boundaries. Now we can attach it and apply. Okay, now we also have the custom DNS configured where here we will have a new line here pointing to the new application. After that, we can go back to the web application and say, hey, let's update the host name, defining a third-party domain and a subdomain that is ID with a record of CNAME type. Attach, apply. This makes a validation under the hood. Azure validates the ownership of this domain, and if the domain is pointing correctly to the resource, in this case the web app, it will configure the binding for to make the website replying to that custom DNS. Okay, now finally we can deploy the web application with a specific command that is deploy with a package URI, zip code. This the supported approach here is to provide a public URL. So I don't want to make the container, the storage container, public, but I can generate for a specific file, a specific blob, a URL that is signed in order to share it with, in this case, this application. This process is called a shared access signature. So in this case, the web app image is in the same private container, but with a signature that let us, the ones that has this complete URL, to download the package and do everything they want. Not delete it, but just reading the URL. So use that package URI, delete everything you find, and execute. Now, if the deployment is completed, I want to notify back Fabio. So just in case, I want to say we made it with root object request ID and ID. Now I create a client of type event grid client, maybe with a new, with the topic credentials that are in the same here. Then it's quite tricky, so I pass the last code. So I call client publish events to a specific endpoint and specifying a list of events, in our case just one, one event. This schema is strict, so it's a default schema. It's not custom. The custom part is just the one inside the data. So in this case, I specified the request ID in the ID field and the URL in the data field. Okay, we can run this and see something happening. Okay, we received the root object, client one, that Fabio made just a few minutes ago. The request ID is true because we made some tests before. So in SharePoint, the ID of the list are progressive and you can change it. So you can change them, or I don't know exactly, but this is because of our test. So now one by one, we get the server, we get the pool, we define a new DB. We can press continue to wait to here. Okay, and in the meantime, we recap all the stuff we are creating. So let's come back one moment to the slide. We are creating a new database inside an existing pool, starting from a DB image taken from the storage. Okay. Of course, the data are sample one, so they are equal for every customer at the beginning. Okay. Then we create our new web application in existing app service plan, and we configure the settings to point to the newly created database. We deploy the code starting from the template in the web app. We obtain the URL of this website to configure it in our custom DNS. And then we go back to the web application to bind effectively that new DNS inside it. After that, we notify the event grid, which we have just missed a part, that is the connection between event grid and the Fabio workflow. Okay, this breakpoint is just to stop the process because we need to make the final part. The final part is here in the topic. The event grid topic can notify multiple endpoints. In this situation, we have no ones. So we can just create the first one, telling the schema is the standard one, and it's a type webhook, and in the webhook we can pass the URL that Fabio gave to me. Now, when someone writes to the event grid, each of the subscription client will be notified with the messages. So now we just need to wait until completion. In the meantime, probably some resources have been created. So let's go to the SQL and let's make a refresh here in the database. Probably a new one here appeared. Okay, it is complete. I publish the event, and probably on the SharePoint side something happened, but just before leaving the word to Fabio, I will see here a brand new application with a custom DNS pointing to this database. So let's try to make some edits. Okay, it's working. So Fabio, can you show to us if the notification correctly arrived to your SharePoint flow?
Yes, of course. Okay, so I refreshed the description page of this tenant URL update flow. 1 minute ago, the status is successed. And if I click inside this log, I'm able to see this flow, and I'm able to inspect the message that you can send me in this execution. For example, you set the ID with the number 3. This is the subject, and of course, we need the new URL. This URL is generated by your code, and another information. So if I switch to the SharePoint side and then refresh, so we have the ID number 3 with title 1, and this is the URL of your new application deployed for this client. It's work.
Okay.
Great.
I can show the recap slide just for our name and contacts. And here we are for questions, and you can reach us by searching to the ASPC directory or by writing an email in our website at robertofriato.com and fabiofranzini.com. And we thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Great, guys. Thank you for a great presentation. Yes, we will have questions and answers. So if you have any questions for Fabio or Roberto, please type them in now. We just have one question in so far, guys. And the question is, do you need flow P1 or P2 for HTTP requests?
Yes, the P2, because some activity are with the premium subscription, and then you have, for example, the HTTP. It's a premium activity, and you have you need the P2.
Okay, brilliant. And that's the only question that we have in. On behalf of the ESPC community, thank you, Roberto, and thank you, Fabio, for a super presentation and taking the time to complete this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Shane. Thanks to all the attendees, and have a great day ahead.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, one last question has just come in. Is the C# sample code published somewhere?
Yeah, sure. In 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I will publish it in my GitHub account. That is, I write here in the chat, the public chat is child OTG. Okay, but if you look for Roberto Friato GitHub, it's probably the first result. In
Super.
5-10 minutes, so just time to clean the solution, delete the connection string, and it's ready.
Great. Fabio, Roberto, again, thank you so much.
To you, Shane.
To you,
Bye-bye.
bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, that is the end of the webinar today. Please see sharepointeurope.com for further details on all upcoming webinars, or visit our resource center for all previous episodes. Thank you for joining us today, and again, a big thank you to Roberto Friato and Fabio Franzini. Take care and goodbye.